it, however it happens.
Today, after the billions of dollars spent and countless hours of literally hundreds of thousands around the country who knocked themselves out for this election, canvassing, donating, poll watching, doing everything they knew how to do. Now, here we are, still a divided country, staring at each other across an abyss, but with a clear winner. We thought what we could do here on our show is spend some time with a few of the people who felt very strongly about the outcome of this race, who have a special personal investment in it, looking ahead with them to what's next. From WBEZ Chicago, this is American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Stay with us.
Throughline is a podcast where we tell stories about a place shrouded in mystery, the past. And to really understand it, we take you there.
Something happened to our collective psyche after the atom bomb.
Listen to hear us reopen stories from the past and find clues to the present on Throughline, the history podcast from NPR.
This is American Life, Act 1. Our items today, by the way, are quotes from the president-elect, the largest deportation operation in American history. So, mass deportations are coming. Donald Trump promised it. People waved mass deportation signs at his rallies. It was the first item in the Republican Party's platform this year. And at the Republican National Convention, Tom Homan, the guy who ran ICE under Trump, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, had a message for undocumented immigrants. You better start packing now. President Trump has claimed he's going to be able to deport between 15 and 20 million people. His vice president, J.D. Vance, said the numbers are lower, that they could do 1 million people per year. But Donald Trump and his team have never spelled out exactly how they would do this. Our producer, Nadia Raymond, wondered about that and looked into what mass deportation would actually look like, if and when it comes to pass.
I was kind of unfazed at first when I heard about Trump's mass deportation campaign promise. I've been covering immigration for years. There's so many undocumented people here that we can't even keep count. The closest estimate is 13.3 million. So it's a big job to round up all of these people and to send them back to countries that may not take them. It's expensive. It's time consuming. It's a crazy task. But then I was talking to a source inside the Department of Homeland Security, and I said something like, I know there's no way Trump can do this mass deportation thing. And they stopped me. They were like, oh, sure it can happen. They said it so casually, like it was a given. So I wanted to talk to someone who could break down how. Like, exactly how could you do something so massive? I tried talking to Tom Homan. He's rumored to be the next ICE director under Trump, but has denied there's a written plan for mass deportations. And he ghosted me. Jason Hauser, however, was eager to talk. He was the chief of staff for ICE under Biden for a couple of years, has been working for DHS on and off since 9/11, mostly in enforcement. He's passionate about all of this, in his wonky government guy way. I talked to him for 3.5 hours, asked him basically to play pretend, game some stuff out with me. What would happen in the first 100 days? If he was in charge of ICE, what could he do to carry out this mass deportation mandate? Jason thinks that, first of all, the new Trump administration will immediately start to prep for this, like the day after the election, this week. They would start talking to law enforcement in different cities and getting them to agree to cooperate, hit the ground running in January. ICE would talk to home countries to get them to agree to take people back. And after those two things align, Jason says, ICE could decide to deport someone, and they'd be out of the country within 24 hours.
I think the first 90 days is going to be hell. You're going to see the buses. You're going to see the migrants in your home, not just blue cities, red cities, Miami, Houston, Charlotte, like red states, Kansas City, St. Louis, right? You're going to see kids not in your schools. You're going to know where they're at because they're waiting in a detention cell and they have cell phones. You're going to see it in social media. You're going to see businesses not be able to open up because their workers didn't show up. You're going to see businesses being raided, and it's going to become more intimate. This isn't going to be about like separating a family at the border that somebody doesn't know that family member. You're talking about separations and movements in your communities where you're going to know the guy. Bill, Juan, Louise, you're going to know the individuals.
One of the things ICE would have to work around is which nationalities to deport first. You know, if you wanted to make the most impact. A lot of countries don't take their own people back. Venezuela, for example, hardly accepts any immigrants back. Brazil only accepts 2 to 4 flights of immigrants a month. So who are the first people who would be deported, like in the first 100 days?
Haitians and Guatemalans.
Haitians and Guatemalans?
These countries take back the most flights, so I have a ability to remove at volume individuals. A lot of them have entered, through pathways that we've developed where we've gained biometric, we've gained vetting, and
Meaning we know where they are.
Yeah, we know where they are, right? We know where they are. They're working, non-criminal. We go out, we find them. We're going to find nationalities that are easily removable, and we're probably going to do it at volume with single adults first, because removing, families is more complex. You got to hold them, detain them, put them in hotels. It's very staff intensive. So I'm going to target down on single adults and nationalities where I know the country will take them back very, very quickly.
Okay. So Haitians and Guatemalans, and then
Well, there's other populations too.
who's
but
next? Who's next after those two?
Hondurans, right? We talk about Guatemalans, Hondurans, Nicaraguans. The ones the countries that are where you see daily, just in the news and the reporting by DHS, Homeland Security, where are the most removal flights occurring? Those are the countries that accept those flights. But if I'm in this scenario where I'm the head of ICE for Trump, all the rules of engagement and policies are out the window. Why not load up a few plane loads of Cuban nationals and send them to the Bahamas? And just send them to a third party. Why not just, I could go find a country that says they'll accept 3 or 4 plane loads of Cuban nationals, and I'll send them to a third party country.
Jason says ICE can focus on getting people in 8 major cities with airport hubs. Philadelphia, DC, Chicago, Houston, Miami, Denver, New York, and LA. Those have access to quick ICE flights to people's home countries. Jason thinks ICE can get people out before they can get to a judge or a lawyer. And one way to catch a lot of people quickly, especially the ones who snuck in and ICE has no info on, is to bring back worksite enforcement, aka large-scale raids. The Biden administration stopped doing those. Do you think there would be raids then? In the first 100 days?
I think there would be raids within the first 3 weeks.
Really?
Those are not hard to turn on. Those are not to operationalize. Those aren't hard.
Like where? Where would they do them?
You would go back to where there's big ICE and Custom and Border Protection resources to do sort of enforcement, and you would do them in communities that would show the most cruelty, right? So there's nothing that would stop, a Trump administration from going into the workplace, going into, our hospitality sector, going into restaurants or businesses and arresting individuals at scale.
Can you walk through what that would look like? What do you think that would look like?
Well, I think it would be very easy to focus on industries that have large numbers and high numbers of migrants working within them. What would stop them from going into a meat processing plant in Virginia, right? Say there's a couple hundred migrants, there's 80 on shift that day. You go in, there's one individual there that has a final order removal, maybe has a non-violent criminal background. You go in, you do the raid, you line all the workers up, and you start checking the status of each and every one of them, right? And then, or maybe you just arrest them all, bring them into detention, and then do the checks to see, who is removable. There's nothing that could stop ICE at that point from just bringing people into custody, detaining them, and then figuring out who is removable at that time.
Tom Homan has not denied this, by the way. He said publicly something like this would be necessary. Homan also said he would do national security threats first, but then raids, sure. Jason says the raids under a 2.0 Trump administration could be more militarized, with SWAT-style teams. That's not how they've been done in the past. He also told me he thinks nothing would stop ICE from going into hospitals or schools or churches. Normally, ICE doesn't do that, but this is just a policy, not a law. So, after doing these raids and trying to get people out quickly, ICE would be left with lots of immigrants that they have to hold until they can get them deported. I wanted to know, where would you hold all these people? Would you build tent camps to hold people?
If it's I'm not looking out for the care of the law enforcement officers that are overseeing it or the migrants, yes, you could. When we did all the evacs, and ICE had a very big support in the evacuation out of Afghanistan, we brought on soft-sided facilities at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and other places around the country. But again,
Soft-sided facilities, is that euphemism for tents?
well, I mean, that is yes. They're big, sort of like fair tent, like carnival tents. They're very thick plastic and they're
Okay.
soft. Yeah. But what I'm saying is let's say we put 1,000.
Like they're weatherproof. They're
No,
weatherproof.
Well,
but
they're not just like Coleman tents, that you would get to
Yeah.
go camping. But what I'm saying is like, but the problem here is those Afghanis were coming to safety. Now you're saying I'm going to bring on a soft side tent to hold people so I can remove them in like 90 days. The idea that they're just going to like, okay, I'm going to live in this deplorable conditions and not cause unrest. That's where it gets very dangerous.
Dangerous because Jason thinks there would be fights, riots, people would be hurt, possibly even die, he thinks. And just so I'm clear here, yes, he means immigrants, but also officers. Jason's very concerned about the safety of the ICE officers. Where else can you hold people you want to deport? Can you house migrants in jails?
Yes.
Could you lower jailing standards to put more people in a cell?
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely.
Right,
But
like
yes,
I'm saying,
yes.
could you,
Yes.
standard before was 3 people per cell, now we're saying it's 6.
That is policy. It is not law. So yes, of course you
Okay. Could you turn places quickly into detention centers or camps? Like, can you change the standards to make it faster?
Yes, I could have, between FEMA and ICE and DHS, we could turn on 25 old warehouses, old department stores in a week.
Wow, in a week. So
Well,
definitely
I mean,
doable in the first 100 days.
It would just be a cement building
Yeah.
with some mats, and then I make sure we have porta potties, some food, right? I have a couple docks there in case somebody gets really sick, and then I bring in, a couple hundred security guards. I could do that in a week.
At the end of the 100 days, how many people do you think will be gone?
Let's just say this. Let's say all rules are out, and I can remove people that aren't removable. Like I'm going to send them to third-party countries. ICE has 48,000 people in its custody now. ICE has 14 ICE planes
Mm-hmm.
that are hardened planes. They hold 135 souls. I need more of those, but why I'm sending those 48,000, I'm probably going to go out and bring another 50 to 100,000 into custody. So if you're talking 30 to 60 days, you could remove 150 to 200,000 people.
So 200,000 people in the first 60 days.
Yeah.
So in the first 100, that gives
yeah.
you at what, like, how many?
I mean, you could get, if all rules are gone and I can remove them anywhere, you could get, you could do 1 million.
1 million people. Of course, Jason's predicting here, assuming there will be no major roadblocks. But the Brennan Center did this thing where they stress tested with experts and government people whether mass deportations could be done. Gamed this all out. In their simulations, funding was a big obstacle right away. So their deportation numbers weren't as large as Jason's. But that was also assuming that the House wouldn't go Republican, which is looking like it will be, as I record this. That would make Jason's math of 1 million people more possible. And when 1 million people disappear from the country, it's more than just bodies gone. There's ripple effects.
One, we'll see massive inflation continue in this country because we just pulled 1 million people out of our workforce. GDP, businesses, small business especially, and then we'll see thousands of people losing their jobs and small businesses closing, etc. Two, law enforcement activity, federal specifically, and in cities and states where state and local law enforcement is supporting this mass deportation program, will halt. Halt. Going out and arresting the rapist and murderer in your county will stop. Why your sheriff is over playing grab ass with Homan and these individuals and trying to do some big mass deportation scheme and throwing grandma back to Cuba. So law enforcement will be chill. 3, migrants will go deeper into the shadows. They will do the steps they need to stay in our country, because it's so much better than going back and risking death in another, that they will hide even more into the shadows.
And so, those that are left behind, it's like they become ghosts. They might stop showing up to work. Maybe they'll move. You'll notice them missing. At your local grocery store, your bar, your daycare. And at the same time, your screens will be broadcasting the deportations. On TV, on social media, shouting the images of a million who are actually gone. Jason thinks this will be strategic.
I think there's going to be like lined up planes, engines running imagery of mass removals. I think they're going to grab people and intentionally break our policy, like break the law, and throw some people back to their home country. And then when the courts push back, they can be like, see what the courts made us stop. And then because then they can go, hey, look at these bureaucratic pencil necks getting in our way. This is the deep state. This is the deep state.
I guess my thing is to what end though?
Winning the midterms.
You think it's all political? You don't think there's any ideological thing that he wants out of it?
Sure, I think he's ill-equipped. But like, there's 8 million on the just on the immigration docket now. How many people have status here on our first generation migrants, or like from migrant families? I mean, we're talking. This would affect like 50 million to 100 million people. Like these sort of actions. The idea that there isn't political consequences to that, even for Donald Trump, I think the pendulum would swing back.
I'm not so sure. I think it's way harder for the pendulum to swing back. If you look at the Democrats' immigration platform, what you see is the border bill that Biden tried to pass. That bill is the most restrictive immigration bill we've seen in years. It's a child born out of the Trump administration, but also parented by the Democrats, making a harsh agenda seem way more middle of the road. Think Piece after Think Piece uses this failed bill as an example of how far to the right we've moved on immigration. How much enforcement and severity have taken over. How much the idea of a nation of immigrants is dusty and Pollyanna-ish. This fall, a Brookings poll said that about a third of Americans agree with Trump's quote that undocumented immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. Poisoning the blood. This phrase chills me. It's not about legality or order. It's visceral. It's guttural repulsion. It is a violent feeling about a massive group of people. And when the president is the one that leads it, it's not just a feeling anymore. It becomes an action.
Nadia Raymond, she's an editor on our show. 2 days after the election, 2 of our producers, Emmanuel Jochi and Lily Sullivan, went to this church near our office in New York City, where on certain days there are migrants and asylum seekers free legal advice, meals, and they met this guy, Roberto, who told them that he arrived in the U.S. 5 months ago from Ecuador, and he's been having trouble sleeping ever since election day. Lily, now joining in the studio. Hey, Lily.
Hey, Ira.
So you spoke with him.
Yeah, he's been staying in a shelter nearby, and he says he can already picture it, what the ICE raids there would be like. He says, let me describe it like a movie. Pictures a group of 100, 200 men arriving, who'd lock up the building and go floor to floor. No one would be able to get out. And they load them up into buses or cars or whatever ICE uses and deport them. Like, that's what you hear about. So that's what he imagines about how it might go. On the streets, he feels a little freer, he told me. Because if someone tried to grab him, he could just run. Like, he'd have that option.
Pero en el refugio, encerrado entre un edificio entre cuatro paredes, uno no tiene para dónde correr.
But in the shelter, he's between four walls. There's nowhere to run.
No me siento ni seguro ni en la calle, ni en el refugio.
¿Dónde se siente seguro?
Aquí en la iglesia.
I asked him, where do you feel safe? He told me, here, in the church where I talked to him. There's no other place where he can feel calm. Because he tells me, ICE can't come into the church.
Though, of course, in President Trump's next term, that might not be true.
Yeah. Like, we have this idea of sanctuary spaces, but anytime ICE decides they want to go into churches or hospitals or schools, they can do that.
Act two, nobody loves our Latino community and our Puerto Rican community more than I do. So Donald Trump won record numbers of Latino voters this year, more than any Republican candidate since they started tracking that demographic in exit polls back in the 1970s. So, how did it happen? Ike Cantarajah spent the day with a guy who's been gunning for this for years.
I first met Sam Negron a few weeks ago outside a Trump rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He's waiting in the VIP line because, one, he's a constable, so that's like an elected sheriff, and two, he volunteers a lot for the campaign. Knocks on doors, does phone calls, is something called a Trump Force captain, and works with Latinos for Trump.
That's what you say.
Hi, Sam?
Yes, sir. I never had no cool nicknames like Pookie or Tito. It's just Sam.
Sam's a proud Puerto Rican. Big guy, classic cop haircut, and he gets personal fast. When I tell him Ike is my nickname, he says, we tend to do that in America, shorten things. Then he calls me his brother.
Go ahead, brother. You should be recording this.
We're surrounded by long lines of Trump supporters who start chanting because they see a protest coming down the street. It's maybe a couple dozen people waving Puerto Rican flags. They're with the Latinx social justice group, here to protest the island of garbage comment that a comedian recently made at a Trump rally. A couple of Sam's friends from Latinos for Trump rush over. They're going to cross the street to go confront the anti-Trump protesters, and they ask Sam to join. He tells them, I don't like to fight. Let them speak.
See, but what I don't like to do the combating thing. I didn't hear what they were saying, but
Another Trump supporter nearby, a white lady in a red shirt, is shouting over us at this whole scrum of Spanish speakers, not really differentiating between the Trump supporters and the Trump protesters. She says, they don't even speak English. Go back to your own fucking country.
yeah, see, that's not cool.
What do you do with that?
Things like that, it's not cool. But you know what? I'm Puerto Rican, Bumpy. I grew up in the South Bronx in the 70s. I've gotten racism from everybody because you see my color, right? I'm very light skinned. Growing up in the South Bronx wasn't easy in the 70s.
Doesn't get under your skin.
That, no. So I tend to ignore that. You know what I found out working on this campaign? That is not the majority.
For most of his life, Sam supported Democrats. But in 2016, he broke with the party. Protest voted for Jill Stein. He got into Trump from videos shared by a Latino Trump supporter. Then, just in the past 2 years, he lost both his son and his son-in-law. They overdosed on fentanyl. He says it's a big problem in Allentown. And he felt like the Democrats, Biden, weren't helping. It made him want Trump back even more. So he started evangelizing, trying to convert people. He's got lit and signs, Boricuas for Trump, Dominicans for Trump. He's got these little scratch-offs for Trump. It was lonely at first in this democratic city, but slowly it started to feel like it was working. He'd been stepping it up for months. And then, Island of Garbage dropped on him.
I hear my wife going, look what just came out. Look what they said. You know, she was furious.
It was hurtful, because that's where they're from, but also frustrating, because he's been out here in these streets trying to pull his people, one by one, towards Trump.
I was double upset because I'm like, one, that's an ugly joke. Two, there goes all the work I've done for the last 4 or 5 years.
Did you think those comments might just cost him the whole election?
Totally, brother. I said, oh my God, there goes everything we've done. Right out the window.
So how to reconcile all this? Being a proud Puerto Rican and a diehard Trump supporter? For Sam, it took 20 minutes of Googling.
Anytime something controversial comes out of that campaign, there's something else behind it. You know what I found out?
Here's how he explains that there was actually a deeper message hidden inside that joke.
Puerto Rico's drowning in trash. They haven't been able to get rid of their trash for the last 4 years. There's 29 dump sites all over Puerto Rico that are mountains of trash because they can't burn because of carbon emissions. And who did that? Back 4 years ago wasn't as bad. It went way overboard 4 years ago. So that's what I believe was the reference that was being made to.
20 minutes of research got Sam from livid about a potentially campaign derailing bad joke to outrage at an environmental disaster he lays at the feet of the Biden administration. If that sounds like opportunistic reasoning, Sam gets it.
Did you need to find a reason for it?
Heck yeah. I needed a reason for it. Like I said,
So he went on a mission the weekend before the election to do damage control. Tell people what he learned and get them to vote for Trump. He also wanted to give people a chance to talk through the ways they felt let down by Democrats. I tagged along because I wanted to know if people would buy it. And part of what I heard helped me understand why Trump took a historic share of the Latino vote. And the way Sam's doing it, he's not following an orderly list of registered R or independent voters. He's going off book. Here in the Supremo grocery store parking lot in the heart of a Latino neighborhood, it's a busy Sunday, there's a lot of shoppers, steady flow of people on the sidewalk. It's a target-rich environment.
Hi. Good, mommy. How you doing? You voting this year? Come talk to me. Come.
Sam spots a Puerto Rican woman he knows pulling into the parking lot.
You parking? Go park. Come talk to me. Right. That's the problem.
Damned if I do, damned if I don't, she yells from the car. This is Melissa. Sam and her clearly go back, but he says he doesn't know how she's going to vote.
Don't do it. I got a bad filter right now.
Oh, how you feeling right now?
Upset.
But what are you upset about?
What I upset is that I'm a taxpayer and I don't get shit. And you got other people that come into our country and they give them everything. But then you want to stay here and you want to downgrade Spanish people. Make that shit make sense.
She's upset about Democrats giving support to new arrivals in the country instead of focusing on the people already here, people like herself. She also doesn't tolerate insults against Spanish-speaking people, so she doesn't like her options.
What could we talk about Sunday, a week ago, at the garden?
The joke the comedian made
Yeah.
about the unemployment. Okay, how you feel about that?
How you feel about it?
Just live it. I told
Sam walks her through how he figured out the island of garbage comment is actually a sneaky PSA about landfill mismanagement. Melissa listens.
years ago. So that's what I believe was the reference that was being made to.
How does that sit with you?
That's facts. That's what you call facts. But again, everybody's so much into the social media. The social media only portrays one side of each story. You understand what I mean? So if you sit here and you analyze both sides of the stories, like I said earlier in my car, that means we do, that means we don't. You understand what I mean? Because here we got our fellas couldn't never vote, right?
Immigrants are able to vote now.
Exactly. Why?
Not true. Illegal immigrants can't vote.
What is that for us that been here all our lives? And that's a right. That's a citizenship right. You know, that's not a human right. That's a citizenship right. you want to vote, go back to your country and vote. Not in a bad way, not meaning that you should go back to your country, but you know what? Get in line and wait like everybody else. Because there's been a lot of illegal immigrants in this country that have been here for years still waiting for their papers. Thousands on lawyers.
And can't even vote. And pay their taxes. And pay their taxes.
The backdrop here is that Sam and Melissa are Puerto Rican. They're already citizens who can vote if they live on the mainland. They don't have to wait in any sort of line. 8 years ago, Melissa supported Hillary. She says Bill Clinton was a hell of a president. Now, she likes Trump, in spite of the comment.
Was I in the same boat a couple of years ago? Absolutely not. I wanted him out. You know, I didn't want to keep dealing with him. You understand what I mean? Great businessman. Great businessman. What fucked him up was his filter and how he speaks to people. You understand?
He got no hair.
I'm not talking. But let's be realistic here. The way he spoke in front of our kids, you're the president. But put it out there. And again, me being a person who doesn't have no filter myself, I can understand that. But there's a time and a place for everything. But at this point, I gotta go here and go there because I don't want to get more digged in the hole than what I am now and get the same shit that I got for the past 4 years.
Melissa ends the conversation by telling Sam she'll vote for Trump. Sam approaches another Puerto Rican, soft-spoken young man named Marcus, and asks him how he felt about the insult.
I think he said it was you guys know there's an island, you know, farthest floating in the ocean? I think it's called Puerto Rico.
1500个人，
I mean,
感觉还是就
as a Puerto
是
Rican, it made me
大
feel
晚
like
上不用出去约会嘛。
I was livid, bro. I was mad. I was.
我们大部分在手绘的画家，他们在看这东西的时候，他对这里的分辨是叫做灰、深灰、中灰跟浅灰。但是如果是我去分的话，我会怎么分呢？我会把这边分成用数据的方式去解释。
Seems like it's sinking.
36跟43因为只差一点点啊，所以你抓一个大概就好了，我们没办法分到那么细。所以，但是我至少我自己在分的时候，我会这样，这个是0，100%是0，对，这是100。
I mean, when I first heard it,
这是100，然后这个呢，
you know what I mean?
大概是
But leadership
95。
could speak so disgustingly about us that way.
有没有看到95的
And even as
明
he
度
was just mentioning it
实
right
际
now,
上我自己画的话，我会把这边画80啊，我
He's
记的时候
still
都是
pissed
记
about the
80。
comment, but he was planning to vote for Trump anyway.
是的话，
And Sam's
是
explanation
it just made it feel all the much better.
30
You know what I mean? That there's a valuable explanation as to his comment.
左右，我就选一个
Because
30。
that's who I'm leaning towards, is Trump. So it feels very, very good to know that.
The next guy, a
哦，
Spanish
我这个
speaker
应该要
carrying a
重新
large bag of dog food, didn't even need to hear Sam's explanation. He just wants to share his critique of the Democrats' failures. Here's Jose.
涂30左右的明度上去，30左右的明度上去，然后我们涂这个30左右之后，我知道说这个边缘大概是20，哦，我把这个东西这样的铺，然后有些地方更亮一点，它应该是大概40或50，我把这个明度把它铺上去，铺对就好。所以你能不能一开始就把明度抓对，这件事情会影响蛮多的。如果你一开始就能够把明度抓得准，你的经验足够丰富的话，这里你可以画得相当的快，它其实就只是辨认数据，然后把这个
Or
数
what they
据把它
can't
铺
get
上
past
去。
is how Democrats have been letting them down in a bunch of different ways.
这样了解意思吗？然后在亮的这个地方，我们就会看到它有很多微妙的这个亮度的差异。我就去找一下数据的变化，这里是71，这个地方呢，这个地方叫62，这个地方叫做64，这里呢叫做69，哦，然后上面这边这个最亮的地方99，但是这个平常的这个版面是88，在更上面呢这是85，这里又是99。好，然后它头发上面这个块面是72。 我们知道这个数据的跑法之后，你就会了解哦，原来它亮面大概都要用到60以上，它的暗面几乎都在50以下。我们知道这个数据就可以归纳出一些规律。所以你姑且我们先不要求你就是能够自创嘛，就是应该说你在画这东西的时候，你一开始应该就要能够抓对灰度。 要不然你在临摹的过程中，你这东西是会 也不是临摹啦，你在自己画的过程中，你不是都会找参考吗？你找了参考，但是你画出来的东西始终跟你的参考对象有差，多半就是什么，就是灰度抓不对啊。了解意思吗？就是多半都是这样子，就是最后你的灰度就抓不对，然后它的效果就不好，然后你一直画不出同样的效果，因为那个明度这些东西不一样。然后当你能够练到，就是你用视觉去看，你都可以把灰度抓得很准的话，你用视觉去看都可以把灰度抓得很准的话，表示一件事情，就是你的眼睛堪比滴管吸色了。可以理解吗？你的眼睛堪比滴管吸色。视觉是可以练习，靠练习，然后把那个准度抓的，就是你可以抓大范围，是不会抓歪的，不会抓差太多。然后灰度很准之后，灰度准之后，还有一个东西叫做边缘准。哦，色感可以这么练吗？啊，我刚好我这个地方我就可以给你看我以前练习的。我以前练习的那个方式，就是我完全没有去，就是怎么讲，有点像是我们今天稍早讲的叫做无脑临摹。怎么样无脑临摹呢？左边跟右边，左边是我当时的练习，右边是那个涂志伟的敦煌插画的其中一幅。你看左边这个是我临摹的版本，右边这个是他原本的版本。那我们在放缩小看的时候，是不是颜色是很像的？对吧？这个我记得我当时是画45分钟左右，一样，就是你想办法你把色调铺的接近就好了，这就给自己的训练。这虽然也是无脑临摹，但它有一个具有明确的目的性。什么目的性？我的色调要很接近，我必须要在看的情况下，肉眼看的情况下，靠调整把这东西做到很接近。这就是很多人做那个做素描的应该说照片临摹的时候在做的事情吧。你想办法让它跟照片的颜色很接近，对不对？那有些人做照片临摹，他就不只要求自己形要接近之外，还要求色彩很接近。我这个自己的作业，我就没有要求那么多，我只要求什么大方向看起来它的色彩很像，它的那个亮暗关系是接近的就好，这是一个基本训练。所以你今天你在画这东西的时候，刚刚我们临摹素描，它是不是只有一个参数？它只有明度要去顾。那你现在在画色彩的时候，你就会变成除了明度之外，你还有色相，然后还有纯度要去顾，它的难度就会变高。所以我们现在不提这个东西，明度、色相、纯度，它的范围就变多了。我们再讲一个比较重要的东西，叫做边缘。边缘是这样的，哦，这里有一个一级，这个东西叫做一级边，这个东西我们把它叫做二级边，然后3级是这样发散，4级是这样完全没有存在感，哦，这就是你在团体中的定位。这个人叫做高富帅，就是他是非常明确的在团体中有存在感的，非常的锐利，我们把它叫做一级。这个呢是什么？这个有点散开来的，这个叫做2级。这个2级是我们所说的叫做一般人哦，就是他可以跟高富帅这些东西做朋友的那种状态。3、4级的话，就是我们应该蛮多同学可以感受到的。3级这个东西就叫做开始有点边缘，因为它距离核心中间的那种小团体之外，它有点边缘化，它大概都在外围这个区域，它的那个扩散的范围比较广。4级就叫做没有存在感，你有没有来？你今天有没有参加活动？大家都不记得。大家在喊要订鸡排的时候，最后也会忘记要订你的，大概是这种的1、2、3、4级。对，1、2、3、4级。那我们在画图的时候，就有一件事情叫做边缘控制啊。边缘控制，如果用生活的例子来举例，就是你今天来到了一个小团体，你想要。你看到这个小团体里面，你想要控制自己在这个团体里面的活跃程度，然后你就怎么讲？就是你觉得你自己想要去控制自己当2这个层级的人，你想要跟着大家一起说话，但是又不想太热络、太活跃， 结果，但是你没控制好，你就不小心把自己变成3级边，变成边缘人，因为你都很酷，你都不说话，就真的没人来跟你说话。你本来假想着说，如果只要有人跟你讲话，你就会跟他好好的对谈，结果真的没人找你说话，所以你找不到机会在团体中发声。这种状况我不知道你们有没有遇过哦。好，它的状况指的是什么？就是比方说像这个吧。
我这个占据
我们现在这样画的时候，你会看到我的阅读顺序被改变了，因为我们刚刚第一时间看到的是耳环，对吧？哦，这个地方是不是有一点点边缘，有一点点虚掉，有一些虚掉？那这个边缘有，然后如果我想要让他的人物的五官这边一样很显眼的话，这个案例不太好，但是我直接先做给你看好了。我可以这样，我会这样子做哦。我们可以让整张图可能都是偏暖的。比方说现在整张图都是暖色，然后我在它的这个领口这边混一点点冷的颜色，混一点点冷的颜色。
Tip number 3, creating adjustment layers in Procreate. For this one, we're going to create a saturation adjustment layer. So we pick any desaturated color, we drop that onto the layer, then we apply a saturation blending mode on that layer. And now what happens is basically this layer acts as an adjustment layer for all of the layers below it. So we can adjust the saturation of all of the layers below it by sliding the opacity slider right there. So pretty freaking awesome. We can now have control over the saturation in a non-destructive way. Now we can also play around with a few other things. Let's say we drop in a red color like so, and then we adjust the blending mode to hue, and you can see it just adds a little taste of red to the entire image, at least the entire layers below this one. And you can use this as a clipping mask on top of another layer, or figure out some clever ways of using it.
这个冷的颜色又特别的纯，你现在这样看，这时候，好，安吉全部都是偏冷的，哦，这种是那种很瘦弱的，但是它看起来像是一个，你知道吗？它也能够同样按照说，不一样流行的做法，就是之前有一段时间流行的做法，你可以整个，比方说我整个。拿这样一张图，我们把它调灰，整张都偏灰，偏灰之后，这就是我们刚刚看到的，经典做法啦。然后我把之后，这就是我调灰，整张都偏灰，偏灰之后，这就是我们刚刚看到的，经典做法啦。然后我把眼神这边饱和度直接拉高。这就很粗暴，马上眼睛就是焦点了，但其他东西没什么变化，就会比较无聊。所以我们其实还是会做几个层次，就是胸口没那么显眼，但是胸口还是有一些纯度提高，像这样，这种方式也很常见。这样可以看得懂吗？这是 我们在画的时候必须去考虑到这样子的调色的一个处理手法。然后呢，刚刚我们讲的是以纯度为主的，我们今天在画图在改，我自己在改图的时候会怎么做？我挑了几个改图的范例哦，有一个也很常用的叫做由暗包亮由暗包亮的策略。好，什么叫做暗包亮呢？举例来说，像当时有一个，看一下OK， 我举一个比较明显的例子哈。好，这张图，这个是之前有个同学就是丢给我问的，就是我现在要做的事情是，它叫做改变阅读顺序。焦点的策略主要能够做到的事情叫做改变阅读顺序。好，怎么改变阅读顺序呢？像现在我们看到这张，很多同学就是当他画单个人的时候，他是知道怎么画的，但是像现在这样一张场景，他就不知道我要怎么去操作了，就不知道我要怎么操作了。我就知道说，我要把人画好，我人画好之后，我画背景，我背景我要上色，我这边我要上色。如果我想要让视觉能够集中在这个人身上，跟这旁边的这个人身上，有一种很粗暴的做法是，我们直接把它压暗，压暗之后，你做一点点这样子的光，你做一点点这样的光，然后我们把这个光照，把这个最强的光照，把它放在人物，比方说放在人物这里。好，这时候你就会看到白色的这种小点，就是以黑白来说，你会发现大部分的东西灰灰的，然后黑色的物件我们看不清楚，最显眼的是这个白色，黑跟白，这旁边都是灰的嘛，这个黑跟白的这个对比最强，你就容易看它，对吧？所以像我用同样的方式，我们做另外一张，这边这张图，这个作者他画的这个图，等一下我们再来说另外一件事情，但是你可以现在看我怎么改哦。好，我现在把它的固有色把它放回来，把它的人物的颜色整理了一下，然后把去掉，你去看这原本的这个图，我这张图这边现在它的这个脸颊这边是不是一级边？这个地方是不是一级边？对吧？这个地方一级边，那我们经常会用一些工具，比方说像是指尖工具这种模糊工具、模糊笔，我想要去把这个脸颊这个地方，就是它推成跟我参考图一样。那我们在作画的时候就这个嘛，这就是要什么？叫做边缘的准度。你能不能精准的控制你在这个团体当中的人际关系？多数的人都很难的，它跟画画一样，画画还比较简单，在现实人际团体当中要控制自己的边缘程度，那个超难。所以你看这边我们常常用指尖工具一抹，结果你就不小心抹过头了，这就变成4级了。你本来想说你只想要就是偶尔跟大家聚，然后不讲话，结果没想到你太多次拒绝了大家的那个邀约，大家最后都不约你了，你就真的变成4级变。看得懂吗？那些很就是对边缘很敏感的，对人际交往很敏感的那些人，他可能在画的时候，他就可以看得出来这里面有一些微妙的变化。所以我在画的时候，我就可以用比较精密的控制，我就控制到这里的那个调子，我不要让它，就是我让它的边缘不要那么模糊，它还有一点点结实的感觉。其实大概就是这样子。那难点难在哪里？如果我这时候还要去对到灰度，我的灰度还要对的话，是不是会变得更难一些？就像这个地方的2级，我要这样的话， 然后你会发现这里鼻子这边在这个地方鼻子这边再稍微更模糊一点，所以我们这边必须再稍微的模糊一些。这个就是那种天生可能从小他就是生长在那种常常大家都会跟他那种帅哥，通常有这种特质，什么特质？他很擅长跟人们交谈，而且可以很自然的夸奖别人。这个是我大学的时候感受到的一件事，就是他的生活中他一定就是大家常常夸奖他或什么，他夸奖别人超级自然。所以他的人缘很好。但是我们从小没有经过这种训练嘛，或者是没有这种体验，你要去把握这个地方的这种微妙的边缘的那种关系，就非常的难。这样了解了吗？除了微妙的边缘关系之外，还有这里面微妙的明度差异。你在画的时候是不是就要去研究说，哦，这个地方明度是多少？我现在这里叫做47，它这边画多少？它这边用42，是因为这边压的比较暗，用成28，所以让我觉得其他地方比较亮之类的。你就要把明度画对啊。我 PS 的工具后来我都不太用指尖工具啦，因为指尖工具非常难控制，你一不小心就真的变成边缘人，所以我后来都不用，我都直接用那个，就是用这种有感压的笔，然后 ALT 去吸颜色，这样子就是去吸它中间色，然后去做它的边缘，去做它的这个过渡。好。所以我们现在知道这件事情，你就回头来看素描本身，它其实分成什么？它分成形状的准度、明暗交接线的准度，明暗交接线的准度就等同于结构。再来什么？灰调的准度，就是你要画多灰，你要画50还是40灰，还是30灰，或者是20灰，以及边缘的控制，它的边缘是1级的、2级的、3级的、4级的。素描本身里面牵涉到这4个大范围的控制，但是我们只讲的素描的时候，你就很难知道自己到底要练什么内容，了解了吗？所以你看，我们光是前面只讲说，就是准确这件事情，就有这么多东西得练。对于一个新手来说，他不外乎他就是想要他看到的图，他能够模仿的很像，他能够画的很像嘛。所以就是变成形要准，比例关系准，然后你会用 CSI 的用法去提炼图形。再加上你有3D 的概念，你能够把它转角度，通常在这阶段你就可以画出很多线稿，你的线稿就不错了。然后你会发现这前面练的东西其实是素描的前置作业，你前置作业做好之后才来就是这边的叫做灰度跟边缘控制。这灰度边缘控制你做完之后，它还有一些色彩相关的知识是独立出来练的，像是配色的概念、灰唇对比。混色的那些微妙色彩的这个混色的关系，还有一些光的知识，以及我们刚刚讲的投影、背光跟避视，这个地方有一些规则。我们刚刚不是有讲，就是这个地方有边缘吗？其实它哪边要用1级边，哪边要用2级边，哪些地方是用3级边，它是有逻辑的，它有一个规范。这个规范大致上就是说，投影会比较锐利，投影这个地方会画的比较锐利。这种明暗转折的地方，它会画的比较糊。它有很多很细项目的规则，所以整个知识它非常的宽广。但是对于刚开始学的同学，我觉得把重点先放在如何画的准确，而不是无脑临摹这件事情上相当重要。漫射光跟阴天光其实是差不多的东西，只是我这边把它列出来，你先懂漫射光就好了。阴天光跟天光其实只是漫射光的另外一种分野差别。对，所以我们光是前面这个，我才讲了1/3，后面这个地方都没有时间讲，因为它其实是我自己的课程里面，我们把整个图说给你看哦，这个图是这样的，我们刚刚的建模，然后渲染， 这两块你有基本的能力，你建立起来之后，你就有基本的表达能力。有表达能力，你才后续再去做设计。所以我们一般讲的那种工作上面用到的原画所用的那些设计，画设计图啊，画人物啊那些东西，它在更上面一层。我大部分讲的是，比方说以金字塔来说，我大概讲这一区块的东西，因为设计我不会，所以我多半不讲。设计我不会，我多半不讲，我讲的是这一小块的东西。然后这一小块的东西，我们今天大概讲了底层的1/3，因为在后面是中间层偏向应用的部分，有包含构成，包含一些我其实有准备课件，但是我来不及说，包含一些就是画面中的动态啊，有一些叫做什么帆船理论啊。这样子的内容我来不及讲，就是它画面当中藏的曲线跟直线，还有三角形这样的东西。这个在我们的构成课里面有讲，那创作相关的，还有配色相关的这个部分，在中间层的我还没有办法说。但大致上来说，这里讲的就是对于初学者他可能会遇到的问题，绝大多数都是不准确，画起来不准，你听再多理论都没有用。你一定要先要求自己眼睛看到的跟画的方式是准的，准了之后我们跟你讲理论，你才能知道它原本它里面骨头是什么。也就是它的说法有点像是我们在学，比方说你在学一个口音，学一个语言，然后例如你念一个什么，念一个 deep dark fantasy。你比方说你这样念的时候，你只是模仿那个影片中你看的那个影片中那个人说的那个方式，他说话的方式，但是你不知道他的真正的那个他的他讲的话的意思。等到你了解那个话的意思之后，你才能够真正的搞懂，就是融会贯通。所以我们要先学，至少你模仿他讲话的时候要能够准确，然后我们再来跟你讲每一个单字的意思。了解吗？它有点像这种概念。你先学怎么念，然后你的口音要念得对，你的那个发音要正确，然后我们后面再跟你讲每一个单词或文法这样子的概念才有用。我的那个名字，英文名字叫念 Krenz，K-R-E-N-Z， 哦，可是大家都不会念，所以也有一个好处，后来都叫 K 大，K 大比较简单 ，K 大也比较好记。好，还有没有公开课？我们今天讲的这东西都在KK 的那个魔法学院里面，那个西西透课里面那个大礼堂几乎都有讲相似的内容。因为我们上正课的时候，很多同学都在行准这个表达上面都做不到，所以我们特别有录了公开课让大家做练习，甚至还开了一个叫做幼幼班的东西，让你进去练习。这个幼幼班大概就是有点类似3个月的时间，你每天花1个小时去练临摹跟去练那个抓形跟默写，我开一下给大家看好了。这是我们一个学生练习的。看他自己练习的，他用这样练，原图、临摹、默写，他还蛮认真的，而且他会试不同的方法，他每一次临摹呢，他有画不同的方法。新方法，看看他有写新方法能加速，然后变了记东西的重点之类的。
東こと高木ひみです。今回は私がいつもしている厚塗りの解説をしていきたいと思います。このやつは約3時間ほど時間がかかっております。早速解説に入る前に使用しているソフトやツールのご紹介をしていきます。使用しているソフトは Clip Studio Paint EX で解像度 350dpi の A4 のサイズのキャンバスになります。厚塗りで主に使っていくブラシは1、濃い鉛筆、2、エアブラシ、3、濃い水彩、4、塗り&なじませ、5、塗料普通、ヒラの5つになります。4まではクリスタの初期ツールに入っているんですが、5は個人の素材で使わせていただいておりますので、概要欄にダウンロードページを貼っておきます。時短をするのであれば、このブラシをすべてショートカットキーに設定しておくことをお勧めします。主に塗りで使う3、4、5は同じキーに登録して、押すたびにブラシが変わる仕様にすると、ショートカットキーの場所も埋めずに済むかなと思います。以上を踏まえまして、早速解説に参ります。ではまずは線画の色トレスをしていきます。線画レイヤーまたは線画レイヤーをまとめたフォルダーの合成モードを上座に設定します。そしたらその上に新規レイヤーを作り、下のレイヤーでクリッピングします。クリッピングとは参照したレイヤーの描画範囲からはみ出さずに色などを乗せることができるレイヤーになります。色トレスをする際は柔らかいエアブラシでふんわり乗せていきます。参照レイヤーが上座なので明るい色を置くと線の色が薄くなります。薄ければ薄いほど厚塗りっぽくできるので、パーツ内の線はなるべく薄く色を置きます。色トレスはクリッピングではなく上段モードの線画レイヤーであれば直で色を変えても OK です。私はフルダーごと色トレスしたかったのでクリッピングを使いました。色トレスと塗りパーツの微調整ができたので着彩に入ります。まずは大雑把な落ち影を入れていきます。塗りパーツをまとめたフォルダーの上に新規レイヤーを作り、合成モードを上座にします。次にそれを下のレイヤーでクリッピングします。サクッと時短して厚塗りするため、陰影は全パーツ一気につけちゃいます。今回はちょっとくすんだベージュの色をとってざっとのせていきます。この時使っているのは濃い水彩になります。アニメ塗りを意識すると影がつきやすいと思います。ざっと影をつけ終わったら透明ピクセルをロックして大きめの柔らかいエアブラシで若干の鮮やかさを加えていきます。上座で色を重ねると色がくすみがちなので、肌などに柔らかくさっき選んだ色よりも鮮やかな色をのせていってください。次はざっとハイライトを入れていきます。影レイヤーの上に新規レイヤーを制作して再び下のレイヤーでクリッピングします。そして合成モードを加算発光にしてください。ここで不透明度が 100% だと選ぶ色次第ではかなり白飛びしてしまうので 30% から 50% くらいに下げます。そして影と同じく濃い水彩でハイライトを書き込んでいきます。陰影が足りないなって思ったら影レイヤーに戻って置いてある色よりもサイドの低く暗い色で見かけをつけていきます。次にざっとつけた影にぼかしを入れたりして質感を整えていきます。ここで塗りブラシの使い分けをしていくのですが、ふわっとしたぼかしを入れながらなじませていく場合は塗り&なじませ、
タッチを効かせたぼかしを入れる場合は塗料普通キラを使います。ここでポイントなのが、そのブラシの形状で透明色を使っていくということです。コピックでいう0番的なもので、描画色を透明色でなじませていくというのを意識してみてください。ハイライトも同じくぼかしたりしていきます。本格的な厚塗りに入る最終確認で、顔だけは本当に大事なので、影・光レイヤーの上に新規レイヤーを作り、下のレイヤーでクリッピングさせ、合成モードは通常のまま、顔周りにオレンジ味を足していきます。周りがくすんでる色なので、鮮やかな色をポイントで入れるとその部分が引き立って見えます。目や唇はどんどんオレンジ味を足していきましょう。影、光、色の大雑把な調整を終えて、いよいよ厚塗りっぽい加筆をしていきます。一番下の塗りパーツから一番上の線画レイヤーまで一気にフォルダにまとめちゃいます。そのフォルダの上に加筆レイヤーを作り、表示色を取得するスポイトで色を取りながら絵を整えていきます。ここからは終わりが見えなく、ほぼ根性での作業となっていくので覚悟してください。塗りブラシ3種類を部分で使い分け、細かいところを整えるときは濃い鉛筆を使います。加筆で一番使うツールはもしかしたら濃い鉛筆かもしれないです。厚塗りの文字の通り厚い層になっている絵なので、ガンガン加筆として新規レイヤーを作って、物足りないところは定山で影を追加で乗せていってください。そしてその上にまたレイヤー作って整えてという作業になってくるので、自分が満足するところまで書き込んでみてください。目は一番人が見るパーツなので、ここだけは特に書き込んでおきましょう。加筆の工程ではスポイトで色を取得することがかなり重要になってくるので、ペンタブレットの右クリックもしくはオルトキーを駆使していきます。 iPad の場合は指で長押しだったかな。とにかくスポイトを使った方がいいです。ベースにない新しい色を加えるときは、ベースよりも明度の低いものもしくは彩度の高いものを選ぶと加筆がはかどります。厚塗り特有の線を描くときは、キャンバス内の特に暗い部分をスポイトで取るのがいいです。線を描く際は主に濃い水彩だと馴染んだ線になります。いつの間に加筆レイヤーがかなり増えてると思うのですが、私の加筆した部分を誤って消してしまったり、ブラシで混色させたくない時に新しいレイヤーを作っています。やっぱり厚塗りってレイヤー1枚でやるっていうイメージがありがちなんですけど、レイヤーが増えれば増えるほど精密さが出せるので、じゃんじゃんレイヤー増やしていっていいと思います。 正直塗りのベースでやっておいた方が良かったのですが、服の柄やグラデーションなどは主に定山レイヤーで追加していきます。ここで足りない服パーツを追加していきます。私は定まった形を描く際の曲線を描くのが結構苦手で、線画を描くと形が歪んでしまうことがあります。なので輪っかのパーツなどは加筆で加えることが多いです。大体の加筆が終わったのですが、胸のシルエットが横の紙で隠れていてもったいないなと思ったので、大胆な加筆をしていきます。結構大きなパーツである横の紙を変形させるので、背景以外の加筆したレイヤーまで全て統合します。マスクで紙の範囲を選択した後にコントロール X で切り取り、コントロール V で新規レイヤーに貼り付けます。こうしたら紙レイヤーを選択してメッシュ変形ツールを使います。紙パーツを別レイヤーにしたことによって周辺の変形を防止できます。変形させたことによって大きな穴ができてしまったので、これを埋めていきます。
Well, a big chunk of the demand for renewables is coming from tech players, from data centers, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a trade-off? You kind of hinted at this between powering some of that demand via wind as opposed to solar, especially with the new administration. What does that trade-off look like?
Yeah, and I mean, the other part of Siemens' business that's doing really well right now is the gas business. And, you know, these tech companies don't just need clean power. They want clean power, but they need reliable power. They need power all the time. And when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, increasingly, both in the US and Europe, gas is what's filling in that gap. So even as you have a transition to renewables, you're also having a boost to gas, and Siemens is there to benefit from that.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. I know the President of the United States certainly is talking about electricity prices, for example, going off the charts. Bloomberg's Will Mathis talking to us a little bit about renewables, and of course, the massive move we're seeing at Siemens Energy this morning. And speaking of massive moves, let's talk about an asset that may be taking a little bit of a breather. Bitcoin cooling after a post-Trump rally drove the cryptocurrency to just under $90,000. Well, let's bring in Bloomberg senior editor for digital finance, Anna Herrera, joins us around the table. So we know the Trump trade is a big chunk of this. Has it gone too far?
We'll have to see how fast the government, the new government, the incoming government acts on crypto. I think the industry expects them to move really fast, but you'd have to think they have other more pressing matters. And obviously we've seen the rally probably it's because of the big contrast with what we've had with regulators so far. They've been really, I guess we could say, aggressive towards crypto, especially in the wake of all those collapses. And so just the idea of perhaps having a new administration is making everyone very excited.
What is the case for this though? Is it as you say, maybe less regulation, more ETFs? Is it that the US is suddenly going to be adding to its own stock of Bitcoin? What is the core of the case surrounding higher Bitcoin?
I think for a long time, the industry has expected institutions to come in, and now with current regulators, perhaps banks and bigger players were a bit worried to come in. Now, if you have friendlier regulators, then it makes it easier for traditional financial players to come in earnest. So we've had BlackRock, we have had big players with ETFs, but you haven't seen dealers come in. So if you expect a world in which, you know, the SEC is more friendly, then you can see the banks or any other major players come in, and then there will be more demand for assets like Bitcoin.
What does a strategic Bitcoin stockpile mean and look like for the United States? Because that seems to be one of the things that people are getting, well, trying to read the tea leaves on, whether the Trump administration will try to build one up.
I don't know, maybe we'd have to ask El Salvador because they had a stockpile. I guess it's just, I mean, any case for more buying of Bitcoin, because obviously it's finite, then you think there's more demand and so the price would go up.
And linking back to our last conversation about grids, there's also talk that Trump wants to bring onshore some of the mining activity. Is that a likely prospect?
It depends. I mean, there has been some mining in the U.S. compared to other countries because the electricity could be, I guess, cheaper. But obviously, it depends on where it goes. They're just excited about everything in general. So you know, I don't know if it's better to be not excited and then be happy rather than the other way around. But
boundless excitement from the world of crypto. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bimbo, Senior Editor for Digital Finance. Anna Herrera on set with us this morning, trying to make sense of this big rally we have seen, and then a slight cooling on the Bitcoin share price as it got to those lofty levels. Now, let's talk about another area of excitement in markets. Will we see more IPOs? Klarna has taken its first step towards a US IPO. The Swedish payment platform has confidentially submitted a draft registration statement to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The number of shares to be offered and the price range have not yet been determined, and all eyes will no doubt be on the valuation that this business manages to get to. Implied by a recent asset sale, according to Deutsche Bank, this business is worth about $14.6 billion US dollars. Bloomberg reporting it could be $20 billion US dollars, or that's what it was. Sorry, our colleagues reporting that that's what it could have been aiming for. I'm interested in the regulatory landscape. You know, is there a Trump play involved in this? Do they feel that the regulatory regime will be lighter on a buy now, pay later business under Trump?
And we haven't seen an economic cycle. Are we about to see an economic cycle? When does that cycle kick in, and how does that affect this entire sector, buy now, pay later? Also, you do wonder kind of what is happening here with the European listings. Here's another one, potentially going to the United States, Swedish company, off they go, better valuations, etc.
Yeah, it speaks as well to the idea of what these valuations even come in at. Because this Klarna is still very much seen as a little bit of a startup. It's not necessarily as much of an established company as some of its other peers. And I believe Northvolt was a great example where the startup momentum was very large and then just completely fell off a cliff.
Yeah,
that'll happen with Klarna, but who knows?
Yeah, your point, Guy, really interesting, because if everything wants to be a tech company, and if tech companies get better valuations in the United States, you know, where does that leave Europe? When we come back, we will have an interesting conversation about another part of the market that we don't talk about very often. Issuance of collateralized loan obligations have skyrocketed this year. Will that continue? This is Big Bang.
I've seen firsthand how some fashion businesses make women feel. And I think there's one thing, you know,
being really vocal and being an Instagram activist and talking about something. There's a difference than putting your money where your mouth is and really trying to do something about the problem. And that's what I did with that business. It was about how do I take everything that I know and I've learned and actually do the opposite. And I think that as a young black female entrepreneur, the only thing that I could do was what I know from my experience. And the honest truth is, I didn't set out to create a company that was like deeply rooted in the principles of inclusivity and diversity. I set out to make a company that was right for me and my friends. And I knew that if I had a problem, chances are somebody else does. And I think that's where so many businesses are, you know, created, when you're solving a problem that's real for you and therefore real for the consumer.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day.
Big tech earnings kick off later this afternoon.
Gilead is coming out right now. We have Take-Two numbers. Back to the markets, right? Our bread and butter.
NVIDIA is one of the best stories of the tech space.
That actually matters a whole lot more.
It might shock some of your viewers.
You're watching The Close.
Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. But geopolitical uncertainties, deflationary pressures, and questions about foreign investment linger. Bloomberg, the China Show, brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China. Bloomberg, the China Show. Weekdays around the world, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street. We are basically deep in the European earnings season. Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets. This is the opening trade. We're about 30 minutes into today's session, seeing a little bit of a mixed picture, a little bit of a retracement when it comes to kind of the losses that we saw in the futures picture. Green on the screen are most of the indexes, but not by a massive margin. Seeing a little bit of pressure still in the Euro Stoxx 50 down. We'll call it 0.1%, being generous, but we'll call it flat just to be safe. Just Eat Takeaway seems to be one of the exceptions, though. Those shares soaring to the tune of over 20% after the food delivery company sells its Grubhub unit to Wonder Group for $650 million. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Charlotte Hugh Morgan to walk us through the deal.
Thank you, Chrissy. Yes, so this is big news today for Just Eat. This is a deal that its shareholders have been going after for years. I mean, it first announced in 2022 that it was trying to sell Grubhub, but it has been quite a challenge for it. So that explains the kind of huge share price jump we saw at the open. A bit more on the details. So as you mentioned, it's $650 million to Wonder Group, which is the startup led by former Walmart exec Mark Law. Now, just on the context here, that's a huge discount to the $7.3 billion price tag that Grubhub commanded back in 2021. You know, peak of the pandemic, you had these food delivery companies, share prices absolutely soaring, you know, people ordering so much takeaway. But I think, you know, that valuation drop is a real indicator of how food delivery companies like Grubhub have, you know, struggled to maintain that momentum.
And so tell us more about why shares then, Charlotte, have reacted as strongly as they have. Because if there was, I read this story this morning, I thought, oh, well, people will be disappointed at the fact that it's worth so much less than it used to be. But clearly that's not the story.
Totally. I mean, I think it's just the market breathing a sigh of relief that the deal's finally kind of gone through. You know, as I said, this has been really in the works for a long time, and you had, you know, Just Eat CEO saying this will improve cash generation for the company. It means that Just Eat can kind of brush itself off and move forward with the kind of rest of its strategy.
Removing the overhang seems to be going down well. Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte Hughes Morgan, on what is happening with Grubhub. Let's turn from deliveries to treasuries. Not entirely sure how you make that pivot smoothly. The former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has warned that Donald Trump's campaign promises, including tax cuts and tariffs, will trigger more inflation.
Cumulatively, this is a more inflationary policy by far than what President Biden talked about and did in 2021. So if implemented, it will violate the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm and will be damaging to our national economy, and I suspect very damaging to a president who authors and supports such policies.
Let's talk more about what we're seeing in the markets. Details from Valerie Titel. Over to you, Val.
Good morning, Guy. We have seen a resurgence in break-even inflation, which is the market expectation of inflation. The two-year break-even has risen nearly 100 basis points since the lows seen in September. We do get the CPI print later today. A lot of eyes on that core CPI number. Month on month is expected to stay around 0.3%, and there is upside risk to that reading to 0.4%. Some Wall Street economists out there noting this morning. A lot of eyes on this core CPI number and what it could possibly mean for the path of Fed rates to come. We have now just less than 25 basis points of a Fed cut priced in cumulatively over the next two meetings, meaning we could see a Fed on pause either in January or December. Not only will Trump maybe, or will Powell maybe get some heat from President-elect Donald Trump, but also bodes the question that we can maybe see rates higher for longer in 2025.
Okay, Valerie, thank you very much. Bloomberg's Valerie Titel with lots to set up the next, lots of inputs for our next conversation. We're going to talk about collateralized loan obligations now. Laura Cody joins us, Global Head of CLOs and Head of International Securitized Markets Group at Jefferies. Very nice to have you with us, Laura. So let's pick up where Valerie was taking us, which was we are expecting rate cuts. We're not expecting as many rate cuts as we were before we got wind of another Trump administration, and perhaps there are concerns around inflation out there. So what does all of that mean for issuance of CLOs? Talk to us about that link.
Sure. Well, look, let's take a quick step back in terms of what we've seen over the course of the year and in turn in recent months, because I suppose, to your point, like we've really seen quite a bumper year on the CLO side. I think in total 52 billion, and it's set to eclipse the issuance that we saw in 2021 due to the fact that we're seeing more CLO liquidations. On the loan side, it's also been an incredible year and has actually been in terms of issue, and that's been around 6 billion. Same picture in the US prior to that. So I think, look, in terms of kind of Europe, now that we have a kind of a view on the rate, on where rates are going, actually it bodes well for M&A going forward. Like as long as we kind of see like growth, some form of growth in Europe, rates coming down obviously is quite positive.
Okay.
And then, you know, look, talking about kind of, you know, Trump and a new regime, look, in a way the market's looking at it and the picture is unclear with respect to fiscal policy, with respect to kind of tariffs, with respect to inflation. That said, with kind of like changes in, you know, with overall changes in leadership, expectation is actually M&A to continue and to grow.
So
The growth story is big.
Seat for issuance in Europe, M&A.
Absolutely,
We've heard from various voices over the last 24 hours being very bullish on the prospects for M&A. Does that extend to Europe, and that's what drives CLO issuance?
I think that's right. I mean, if you think about M&A in total over the last year, it's probably been about 30% of overall issuance. We really need to see that get back to its kind of normal average of about 50%, and that really means the picture for next year is going to be incredible for CLOs in that respect. Like if you think about it, how big is the CLO market? It's actually about 1.25 trillion, and of that 1.25 trillion, that's housing about 70% of the leverage loan market. So expectations is into 2025 that we continue to see that demand on the CLO side.
Should I think about loans as an inflation hedge?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because actually if you've seen what the reaction in the US more recently over the last few days, what have we seen? The ETFs, the Invesco ETF, which is the BKLN, actually brought in 340 million in one day, right? What does that say? That people are looking ahead and saying, actually, you know, high yield floaters is the place to be. And it bodes very, very well actually for kind of any sort of Trump leadership. Expectations are very positive tailwinds for CLOs and leverage loans, for sure.
If I think about where money's going to go, though, a lot of US firms are looking at the CLO market in Europe and are starting to kind of try to position for that. Does the Trump presidency disincentivize them to continue with that process and focus more on the United States? Or do you think that process continues?
I think the process continues. I think actually, look, if you look at the investor base for CLOs, it's actually very global. So you have to think about the impact. What's the impact effectively? What's the impact on kind of lower rates in Europe, lower inflation? That has an impact on the exchange rate. So you'll have people move from kind of US into Europe. We're always tracking where the value is, really, right? And so the big players from the US, from the treasuries, from bank treasuries, from insurance companies, pension funds, they're always looking across from the US into Europe. So I think we see continued. I mean, and the picture has been quite good in Europe if you think about it. Like default rates have been lower. It's always been a low growth story in Europe. As interest rates come down, that's an interesting place for investors to actually invest. So our expectation is, we look to the US. We always look to the US and kind of what's going on.
Yep.
And going back to kind of thematically what we're seeing in the US, actually going back to the ETFs, one of the biggest kind of growth areas in the US has been kind of these AAA ETFs that we've seen. If you look at the Janus ETF, it's now, I think it's kind of, even in more recent days, entirely ETFs is around 18 billion. We're seeing that in the MES side. And then in Europe, we've seen in September, we saw the first launch ETF as well. So, thematically, we're seeing people move into Europe with similar ways of investing and taking views.
Is there a regulatory overhang in the CLO space right now, or we're waiting decisions coming out of ESMA, among many others, not to mention the effect of private equity, for example? When it comes to CLOs as a financing mechanism, is that an issue?
Look, I think in Europe you've always got more regulations. When you look at kind of in particular to the kind of the ETF on the ETF side, where the US has really been the front runner for kind of building that. Europe on the regulatory side has been a little bit more muted in that respect. So it's kind of, as I said, it's not the first time that people have had to try to grow that. Look, generally European regulation, transparency rules, being more open with docs, having kind of dual rated structures, etc. There's typically more regulation in Europe. But that said, look, it's a great investment place for investors as we walk through, as we go into an environment where it's less clear, less clear in terms of direction. CLOs offer investors the ability to access a diversified pool of obligors across multiple jurisdictions, across multiple industries, and that allows in a kind of a more, because the fact that it's actually a managed product means that a portfolio manager can access and maneuver through different market environments.
All right, Laura Cody, Global Head of CLOs and Head of International Securitized Markets Group over at Jefferies, joining us around the table to talk about that CLO market, talk a little bit about those financing conditions there and the regulatory overhang that may or may not exist over. Speaking of regulatory overhangs, let's talk a little bit about one of the biggest deals in Europe right now, and that is the BBVA and Sabadell deal. In the last 24 hours, we heard from the CNMC this idea that the antitrust authority in Spain is saying, we need a little bit more time to review the competition around this. This is crucial. It was initially a 10 billion euro deal. This could mean months of debate about whether or not this is actually anti-competitive. Sabadell arguing this would take, of course, one of the major players is on the kind of competitive pricing off the table. BBVA saying this actually doesn't do that simply because a good chunk of their profits, their growth, is coming out of not Spain, but Mexico, and there's a Trump trade in that.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting, that angle on the Trump trade. I mean, it's interesting that we're talking here about a domestic deal, aren't we, Guy? And we can't seem to get to the end of those, let alone the cross-border ones that, of course, in Germany and Italy are much talked about right now.
The argument against this is concentration risk. Maybe that speaks against the idea that you want to do domestic deals. You actually want to do cross-border deals.
Ones, yeah.
In some ways, that sounds more logical if there is a concentration risk concern around this deal getting done. But if Europe is struggling to get domestic deals done with a single regulator, it does make you wonder about these cross-border deals.
Well, I think BBVA is also very interesting outside of the Sabadell deal as well, because they're doing active investment in London, but also in Germany, which is a very overbanked kind of part of Europe anyway. So the fact that they actually think they can make gains in these other European markets is pretty fascinating. Of course, they're focusing on Sabadell, but there is that Germany outlook as well.
We'll talk about Germany next and do it in more detail. We're going to speak to the author Katja Hoyer on Germany's Crumbling Coalition and Olaf Scholz's snap election plans. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
What legacy I would love to leave is to make sure that in my village I have infrastructure. So long when I'm gone, things are still working, then I have done my job. And if some people get inspired through my work and then try to engage themselves for their community and create something that is inspiring for everyone, I will be happy.
What's the best piece of advice you would give to someone young who wants to make a difference actually in this world? In architecture or with something else?
Well, I'm not the right one to just do that.
I think you are.
Yeah, but with the pressure you have, and then you try to be the good one, the fancy guy, the intellectual one, I have no advice then to believe in yourself and really work hard. You know, when I started, no one would have imagined that I will be able to see my name connected with Aga Khan or Pritzker or sitting at Bloomberg to talk about sustainability, about future of sales. No, myself, I